I have a pretty significant allergy to dust, and so last recording I was like struggling the whole recording. Roland had to stop it at some point in time and say, "Don't die on me, JM." I'm like, "It's not dying, but it is uncomfortable." I need to see if there's like allergy medication or something like that. Holy crap!
Or just cleaning, you
Or
spend
cleaning.
3 days, just wipe everything off, that could help.
Allergy medication or cleaning. I'll take the pill. I think that's the way it works, right?
Welcome to the What's Your Baseline podcast, where we demystify enterprise architecture and business process management.
We're here to bring best practices and lessons learned from our years to your ears, as well as interviewing friends we've met along the way on our professional journeys.
My name is Roland Volt, and I'm joined today by my co-host, JM Erlinson. Hey, JM, what are you working on these days?
What am I working on these days? Oh my goodness. I have a lot of things that are going on besides the What's Your Baseline show and Patreon and company. I'm working on a ton of things. I just finished my festival, the Sing Festival, singtoronto.com. It was an amazing time. I just wrapped helping the Takatsuki Jazz Festival run, which is over in Takatsuki, Japan. I've been crazy busy, my friend, and it's really exciting. And I've also been helping to review some of the things you've been creating with the amazing apps from BPM OS, which tell me more about. You've been working on those things too, right?
Yeah, but we had a whole episode, so I don't want to repeat the whole episode on it. Having said that, little update. Today, which is obviously not the day when this episode will be released, today I just uploaded the version 1 files to our shop. So more to do, more cleanup, more documentation to be provided, all that wonderful stuff that nobody wants to do.
Congratulations.
But I guess once this is out, it's out. So guys, go to bpm-os.org and take a look if you like it and let me know.
It's a good place to get some of the capabilities you might need. And I think that's actually a really good bridge for today, right? Because we often talk to large organizations. I mean, I don't want to put it out there like every organization I think is important. I come from a small business, but my family was a 7-person shop. I talk a lot about it, but you and I worked for a ton of like Fortune 500 companies, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees. Like we understand that things scale up and scale down. One thing that I've seen a lot of challenges with is helping to scale process and architecture, particularly down, or particularly earlier into the operations of an organization. I talked to a lot of friends here in Toronto, which has a big startup community, about process engineering. And their first thing to say to me is like, "Nah, man, I can't even think about that. I'm just trying to launch a product, get customers, and get funding packages. I don't need this, and I don't even know when I would." And having that conversation has been hard. What's your experience with working at organizations of an earlier nature or a smaller size?
Oh, I can tell you because I'm running one of those. I wholeheartedly agree with that statement because in German we say you're selbstständig, which means you're working by yourself, selbst, and always ständig. So it's all the little things that you have. I think you need to have some foundation, to think about this. But I also think it should be in your mind relatively early. But having said that, because obviously I run into that problem right now and I need help, I thought, hey, why don't we just invite a guest who's working in that field of startups and process and all that stuff. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Vidar Hokstad to our little show. And Vidar, tell us a little bit about you. What have you done? How did you get to that topic? Why is that interesting for you?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So yeah, my background is I'm originally from Norway, and I started studying computer science thinking I was going to go into academia. And 1 year into my studies, basically, I decided to start a company with a few other people I met in the computer science lab at university. And we started an internet provider because we thought that, well, how hard could it be? And had no idea what we were letting ourselves in for, but we were unhappy about the internet connection we had at home, basically. And so that's the way I got into startups. We just jumped in. We had no idea what we were doing, and had to figure all of it out from scratch with no processes to start with. And we had to learn basically everything. How do you set up a company to start with? How do you do marketing? How do you do sales? I had to do phone sales. I'm a massive introvert, and was thrown in and had to do phone sales because somebody had to do it.
Yeah.
I had to figure out how to set everything up. And I decided I actually liked jumping from between all of these roles, and enjoyed the chaos around it. And so after that company, actually the lawyer of our investor headhunted us to one of its other clients after we sold off the dial-up part of that internet provider. And from there, I went to another startup, co-founded a company that got VC funding, and that's how I ended up moving to the UK, where I've been now half my life, basically. And I've gone from mostly from startup to startup, with the occasional bigger company thrown in. And I've then, in later years, started doing consulting because I've gotten to a stage where I'm getting a bit on the expensive side for a startup unless they are like on a rapid upwards trajectory already. And but a lot of people can benefit from that experience in smaller doses. A lot of the time, they don't need me full time. People, need course correction or some help figuring out how to build their team, or
Yeah.
how to get how to get processes in place, for that matter, in a way that won't stop their progress when they're still small.
I love it. And I think we're going to ask a lot more of those questions today because in particular with Roland's, what's your baseline LLC? It's an important time, but I think it's a fascinating conversation. Because one of my like idols in the process space is somebody who worked at a startup, and implemented processes from day one. Even though it was hard and expensive, it was valuable to them. So I'd love to exchange experiences. But before we get to that, tell me a little bit more about yourself as a person, besides the work you've done and your bona fides. Like we love, our audience loves to know about your life outside of work, your hobbies, your bucket list items, and tell us a little bit about who Vidar is.
Well, so I'm an archetypical nerd in the sense that I started programming at age 5, so it's a large part of my hobbies as well. So I just program different things or develop different things outside of work than what I do with work. And but then in addition to that, I write. So I published a couple of sci-fi novels. They're, as it is with writing, if anybody who has actually published novels very quickly learn that unless you're in the like 0.001%, you're not going to make a living out of it.
Yeah.
So I've sold more than the average book sells, but that still doesn't cover my takeaway budget. But it's a fun way to spend the time if I really actually do want to like completely detach from the software development stuff I'm doing. Yeah, I think that's what I spend most of my time on. But I like travel. My bucket list involves retiring to a French castle. So I better have a few big successes left before that.
Yeah.
Well, I will tell you, actually, there's a great Instagram account, which, being in Toronto, which is one of the most expensive property cities in the world, there's a great Instagram account that I like to follow, which is, what could you buy for the cost of this Toronto house if it was a castle? And it's like, oh yeah, this house is going for 9.7 million Canadian dollars, and here is an estate in Tuscany you can get for the same cost.
Oh
And
yeah,
it's like, oh my goodness, yeah,
that's the
cities.
amazing thing. Yeah, that's the amazing thing. It isn't actually that unattainable. For the house I'm living in London now costs more than a typical sort of 10 to 15 room French castle. So
Well, you have to invite
Yeah,
us
but
over when you get your castle finally. We can do that jam in person.
the problem though is running costs.
I see.
yeah,
You have to have all that
watched it.
staff and all the butlers with their
Well,
with the
even without staff, just heating those things is like
Yeah.
oh
Yeah. Or renovating it, you might get them
yeah.
cheap, I followed a couple of YouTube channels who did that endeavor, buying an old French house at the countryside or a mini castle, and renovate it. It's like horrible. Why do you do this? The clicks can't be that much worth. By the way, I follow your point on books. I got 2 under my belt. It doesn't pay. So, but it gives you a nice credibility booster, I think. At least if you write nonfiction.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. If you write nonfiction in particular, yeah, being able to point out you've literally written a book on the subject you're talking about is fantastic.
Anyways, let's get to the topic where we are. So, Vidar, talk to me a little bit about the progression of a company, right? So where I want to go with is where everybody says startup, right? And I always like to make fun of, oh yeah, I worked for that small audit firm. In all reality, that small audit firm had 250,000 plus employees. So it wasn't that small. But let's talk a little bit before we go into the actual content about definitions. How would you define a startup versus a small firm or a medium-sized firm or one of those big conglomerates, so that our audience knows, okay, if we talk about startup, this is the group of people that we're looking at.
If you're looking at what people would consider a startup, I think the first thing is that you want to separate it out from companies that are like fully operational from day one. Like if you're setting up a chip shop, you set up the shop and then it's not the startup anymore. You have a running business and it's functional. When you're talking about startups, it tends to be companies that are aiming for a rapid growth, and they're not yet at a point where they have positive earnings to start with. I think that's the thing. The moment you're actually profitable, it's starting to get a bit like, okay, why are you calling yourself a startup at this point? But a lot of the time, we're even talking about pre-revenue, and people are building something where the goal is to scale it up significantly. If you're looking for like a 5% year-on-year growth, that's a small lifestyle business, and that's great if that's what you want to do. But it's not. People aren't going to like consider that a startup, other than maybe the first year or two.
That makes sense.
So if you're going into it like looking to get VC capital, for example, or looking to get an angel investment, even that's like more of a startup mindset.
That makes sense. And how did that change the nature of how you build the organization? You mentioned your pre-revenue. So any money that comes in has to be money from an external source.
Yeah.
What does that do as you're looking to create the company? Like, how does that change from a large organization that would have a steady stream of revenue, have the ability to invest in things kind of with more like budgeting capability built in, versus when cash isn't so cheap?
Well, exactly. You got to it there by saying when cash is cheap. Basically, when you are pre-revenue or pre-earning startup, you are paying with a proportion of your future earnings, because you are selling parts of the company and you're never going to get that proportion of your earnings back again. So the earlier you are, the more expensive cash is, because you are trading shares of the company for cash, and that means you're trading away future earnings. And obviously, you're hoping for a rapid growth, and if you're not getting rapid growth, it doesn't really matter. If the company is just floundering, it doesn't matter. So you need to think of it on the basis of, well, what's the good scenario? If the company is doubling in size every year, which is obviously can't do very long, but if it is at the start, then if you can defer spending something for 6 months to a year, then you end up paying far less for the same thing, even if the dollar amount is the same, because you're trading a smaller portion of your company to get to the cash to buy it.
So a little bit as an off topic here, but what would be your recommendation for somebody with a great idea? Not that I know someone, but basically, what would be your recommendation? Is it like, okay, inherit something from your grandmother that you can live for X months or years, or is it living frugal, and sew your own clothes, or what would be your recommendation if somebody really just has an idea?
it really depends on your ambition for it. I think I quite, on one hand, I quite like the idea of bootstrapping, and if it is something you can afford to do that with, and your growth, and you're not basically looking for like 10x growth, then bootstrapping can be fine. You don't. The advantage being that you're not giving a part of the control to anybody. You're not getting investors on that you have to actually, keep happy. On the other hand, I have raised VC capital multiple times. And if you're of the mindset that, yeah, I would just want to test this idea, I want to see if it has legs, I want to see if it can go to like 10x, 100x, whatever. And if it doesn't, I'm prepared to walk away from it. Then VC capital is fantastic. But the key thing there is that the moment you go down that route, you don't really own your idea anymore. You are going to have investors on board that owns at least part of it, and quite likely end up with a significant element of control. And in that case, you really need to be of the mindset that you are building this to build it fast, validate it, see how it goes, and potentially just walk away from it if it isn't panning out. Because otherwise, you are going to get emotionally invested in a way that's not going to lead you down a sort of a happy path, because most VC-funded companies fail.
Yeah.
Your investors know this. They're betting on this because they are looking for the 100x. They're not looking for the 1.5x.
Right.
Doesn't matter to them. That's a rounding error.
So it's important to fail fast, and these organizations are looking and expecting many of those to fail, right?
Yeah, they want you to spend your money quickly, and either get the next funding round or fail. They don't care if you are able to like salvage the company and just keep on like going at like a zombie, and you're not actually seeing growth. They're not interested because they make all of their returns out of the companies that goes 10x to 100x. They're not, if you're not ready to raise another round in 1 to 2 years, ideally before the like 1.5 year mark, you are not going to give them the kind of returns that they are looking for, and so they're going to lose interest in you. They might still give you more capital if there's a chance of salvaging some money by moving ahead to another investment, but they're not going to invest a lot of resources.
That's a question for when you're looking to try and make things work, particularly scale things and support a larger product stack, or to be able to reach your product more quickly. And we're going to talk obviously a lot about the age of AI, right? So tell me about, in this world where, like, it's so expensive, everything is very expensive, but you want to spend your money on things, and you're trying to scale offerings, and you're trying to course correct along the way. How does AI change the equation for these startups as they look to create and iterate on product?
So you can get to a good starting point much faster than you could before. So you can get to a proof of concept much faster. So you can go out and actually talk to an investor and show them that, well, this is how it's going to work. And you need to stress that you have a prototype. It's, you might show off something that works, but it needs further work, and that's what you are raising capital for. But I think that is the beauty of it. You can go out and actually show something that illustrates much clearer how things work. You can then go on and you can build a first version that might be, not ready for a lot of scale, but you can do it much faster. And I think that ability to prototype and iterate and throw things away is something that we have liked to talk about, as within sort of software development community, but it's rarely practiced because in the past it's been too expensive. So the result tends to have been that you end up with a prototype that looks too good, and then people are saying, "Oh yeah, let's just fix the prototype so we can launch with the prototype instead of writing something again from scratch." But the benefit here with this ability to iterate much faster is that we can afford to throw away much more code than we could before. So that when you're doing the actual version that you're actually launching with, you have learned a lot of lessons from those previous versions.
Yeah, I can relate to this because that's obviously what I'm doing, to say, hey, build smaller apps, don't aim for the big integration, don't aim for the central user management, don't aim for this, don't aim for that, but have a smaller scope, build something that's usable, so that you add value to people who might want to buy it, But obviously, there's the bigger plan behind where I'm thinking, oh yeah, do I need to refactor this? And what is the best way to refactoring it? So I agree with that, and I was super impressed how AI could accelerate this. Maybe I shouldn't, because obviously it's built by nerds for nerds, right? They're scratching their own itch.
Oh
But
yeah.
yeah, I can relate to this. Yeah.
But the question here is, now that you have these like ability to accelerate, and obviously, like when you said like, hey, let's just fix the prototype and it becomes the product, like I could feel myself squishing my body together like in awkward. I don't, obviously
Yeah.
that's not right. The question is, how do you actually ensure that the product you are creating is aligned with a customer segment, with needs, that the company that is around that product is going to be able to support it in a way that that earns and retains customers, and that each iteration is built on like the right bones. Tell me about how you do that.
So I think the interesting thing there, since we're talking about processes, is that the sort of the surge in interest around AI has also led to a surge in interest around processes and writing specs up front, and actually doing a lot of planning. And that as well benefits massively from this iterative process of getting a prototype ready first, because the artifact that comes out of that has value isn't the prototype. It is the documentation that you built up as part of the process to create the prototype,
Mm.
and all of the knowledge you've acquired and hopefully then turned into documentation and specs. That means that the next time the next version you are building is built on the basis of a lot more of a process and a framework that you have fleshed out during that initial process. And a lot of what I'm doing there now actually is trying to find ways of mining that and structure that so that you are building on a stronger and stronger foundation of specifications and so on. But it turns out a lot of people are now learning that they should go back to what they learned at school about design and analysis and the processes of software engineering that were promptly thrown away by the internet companies that have pushed very hard on the move fast and break things mantra
Yeah.
instead of processes.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask, because a couple of years ago, everybody said, oh, we're agile, which is obviously uh, language code for, I don't want a document, and do you see the pendulum swinging back now? Because I've seen people who actually say, yeah, the AI work is not the actual writing of the code that somebody has AI type, whatever. It's more like working it and get the good spec in advance so that the AI knows what to build in the right way. So do you see
Yeah.
that pendulum between agile and maybe more the stuff that you learn in academia?
Absolutely, and I think the interesting thing there is that there's a hot concept now floating around. People are talking about dark factories, about having sorting out sort of automating the build pipeline for software, and the idea that you're feeding specs in and you're getting code out, and people are then now learning the hard way that actually writing those specs is one of the hardest part of the entire process. Writing the code when you have a good spec is easy, but what we have spent the last 25 years doing has tended to be to skimp on the specs and just assume that the software developers can figure it out without specs. And to a large extent, well, developers have been able to figure things out without specs. But
Yeah.
that doesn't work when you're trying to feed this to an AI, because it's not
yeah, I
going
agree.
to. It doesn't have all of the context around your business that the developer that's actually talking to people.
It's a person with their own thought, and I think like, oh, what is that? And what I notice is like consistency is a hard thing for an AI to do.
And the person that's actually present in meetings with stakeholders. And this is the challenge now, is that people are seeing firsthand that, oh yeah, actually documenting the requirements, documenting and fleshing out the specs is one of the hardest parts. So I'm working on a project right now where part of the idea is that, well, if you are going to start automating something, then sure, yeah, writing code is nice and all, but automating parts of the processes around distilling specs into something usable is actually far more useful than automating the code writing bit. Because the code writing kit, you could, you could outsource that for cheap if you had good specs.
Yeah.
And people have done that if they have good specs, but most people don't have good specs and really need to get some.
Taking a step back. So you literally go back and say, hey, I fire up my process tool and I map out the process that a user or a business person shall do, or do we just talk about the process of developing the software?
So it's process of getting actually all of the requirements, so yeah, use cases, getting all of the requirements around that in place as well. Because yes, the interesting thing is that the coding agents can get a lot of the software architecture side reasonably right if they have, with relatively little context. You need to tell them a bit about things, but because they know all of the software development patterns. What they can do is guess at what your actual business requirements are and guess at what your stakeholders want.
And that's something I think that's important to remember is when you're using AI to do coding for you, sure the prompts are your own, but like the AI is not proprietary. I mean, Roland, you were using Claude. Everyone developing on Claude is using Claude. It's not your proprietary AI. This code is shared. What is yours absolutely is the ideas, is the processes, is the use cases, is the customer segments you're looking to go to. So you want to talk about uniqueness. That's the part that is truly unique and specific to you. So that's something that I think we talk a lot about. What does a future of AI look like, and how much of this is actually original ideas that are represented through the execution of AI versus how much is AI just regurgitating something that everyone gets to have. I mean, it's almost like a coding public utility, if you will. That's a question that we will definitely tackle a little bit as we get into our second section. And I want to take a break here for a moment. You've been talking a lot about the ways in which organizations come into fruition and scale and build products. And I wanted to turn it back to our audience and ask, have they taken an idea from concept to realization? How did you do this? Was something that you coded or created, an organization you built from scratch? And have you had a chance to use AI to do this kind of thing in the recent times when it's been more accessible? And if so, is that something you sort of ignored your roots of processes and specs that helped to build something up, or was this a foundation of how you were successful? We'll leave you for a moment to think about that and come up with our second section, how you can integrate process into your AI startup lifestyle. Hey, happy day, I need your love, won't let you down. Hey, happy day, I need your love, won't let you down. Love won't let you down, won't let you down. And welcome back. Vidar, very, very interesting conversation, obviously by someone who's been in the trenches multiple times. And I think our audience can hear that between the lines that this is based on experience. But what I like to do is now, as always, in our second segment, is to come to the how. Right. And I'm thinking, again, our little scenario, our pre-revenue startup, the question for those guys is obviously, how do you recognize when putting process in place will help to accelerate versus the typical misconception of, oh, it just slows us down. We don't need this. We're agile. How do you, as a startup, recognize that now has come the time that you might want to take a step back and say, hey, what are we doing here?
So it's an interesting question. So, I mean, what my typical sort of startup experience is that I tended to be the first person in, either as a co-founder or, first technical hire. And then I've been with the company until, we scaled up a development team, in some cases to like multinational teams and that kind of scale. And you then quickly start sort of learning that, well, the key skill for functioning well in a startup is that you can't get attached to a role definition, because you're going to be all over the place. You're going to be doing very different things today and tomorrow and 6 months from now. And that role is going to evolve because the company is evolving. And that also includes figuring out sort of when to get those processes in place. And it's a challenging one because you have that constant pressure to deliver. And at first, it feels like it's very fast to just write things. And
Mhm.
at the very start, it kind of is because you are starting from nothing. And a lot of it is figuring out, well, what is the right thing to build? So you are exploring and you are testing things and you are throwing together things that doesn't need to work for a million users. It barely needs to work for 10. But processes start to make sense relatively quickly because you can start with very, very lightweight processes. Getting in place, some basic practices of writing test plans will
Mm.
very, very quickly start saving you when you are trying to do releases and need to know whether those releases are actually an improvement on your previous release or whether it's totally broken. And people that's often sort of people's first realization of, well, we might need some processes is exactly because everything starts falling apart because they are lacking the discipline of
Mhm.
getting in place QA, getting in place project management. And, again, developers tends to freak out at the thought of those kinds of processes because they are then expecting this whole massive thing of having to write lots of documentation, right? Put together lots of plans and stuff like that. But even getting a basic Kanban board, agile processes in place, is often an improvement on early stage startup.
Yeah.
But going the next steps is often also helpful very quickly. And frankly, the best way of figuring out when it helps you is to start introducing them piece by piece. And you will
Please.
see very quickly that a lot of these processes are going to speed up your delivery and not slow them down.
Yeah, that's one thing that I would like to mention here because I've been in organizations who did this. Just writing a damn ticket or a card on your Kanban
Yeah.
board doesn't mean that you've done the work. Right. So you see
Yeah, yeah.
oh yeah, good. It's out of my mind. It's somebody else's problem. You need to follow up because if you put something on a card and you say, hey, this needs to be done. Well, if it doesn't get checked, we're talking with humans here. If it doesn't get checked, it won't get done. Right. And
Yeah.
uh, that was a non-pleasant experience.
And Roland, I mean, I wanted to interject a little bit here because I actually had a chance, right? I'm working with a startup right now, and I did a lot of employee interviews. I think there's 5 people who work at the company. And one of the common sort of conversations that I'm having with people is they have no idea how what they do fits in with a larger picture of how the company's supposed to work.
Yeah.
And they have no idea how other things that are very close to them, tangential but very close, work. And so we talk about, like, how does this other function work that I need to rely on to deliver my little piece
Mm.
very well? And they're doing an excellent job, but then they sort of throw it out in the world and pray that it's part of the larger picture and that other things are functioning that make it look good and work for their customers. And I feel like even having process and architecture as a communication layer goes a long way, not necessarily in delivering better product, um, only, but in more consistently delivering better product, and also in keeping your small, talented, often well compensated team in alignment as they look to ship new capabilities to their customers and they rely on each other to make that happen. And so that's a question to you is, as we look, Vidar, as process becomes more of a conversation inside organizations, how does this change a perspective of an organization? How does this build a different strategy for how they're looking to set up capabilities and work with their teams to ship those capabilities reliably, repeatably, and scalably?
So I think that getting that alignment in place is critical, and I think, yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Getting the architecture and everything in place as a communication layer is a big deal. But not only the architecture of what you're building, because engineering teams, for example, often get a lot of communication about, well, here's what we want to build. What they often
Sure.
miss out on, and this is a massive pet peeve of mine, because I even see like CTOs who are sitting there in investment meetings and stuff like that that fail to communicate this back to their team, is the why and what. It's like
Yeah.
what you're going to build, but you don't know what the product is, and you don't know. And this is the biggest flaw at all. We often see teams that don't know what scale they are building to. And you often hear this sort of game of telephone going on in these teams where the developers are sitting there, they got a spec, they need to build this thing that's meant to be scalable. But they don't know what scalable means in this case, because they don't know what size the market is, and they don't know the proportion of the market that the company is aiming to get to, and they don't know what proportion of that end goal they are aiming to get to in the next 2 years. So you find developers that are like, that think the system needs to scale to 10 million users when the total worldwide market for their product might be 10,000. Right? And you end up with solutions that are scaled for a cost level that is like completely out of proportions. And they will tell their managers that, yeah, but we need this to be scalable. But there's this whole lost piece of communication there about, well, does it really need to scale to this size for that? So a lot of my work is often to cost cuts, solutions for people, and the first step is to ask, well, okay, what's your market and where do you need to scale to in 2 years? And often it might be that they need to scale to that 10 million in 10 years, but they don't need to spend the money to scale to that now.
How does that resonate with the individuals that you speak to? Because, and I oversimplify and I overgeneralize here, right? But if I want to be mean, I would say people go into IT because they don't want to talk to other people, right? on the really far end, But I've seen people in IT, developers, who said, "Yeah, I don't know why we built this. It's just." I'm looking at it from a technical perspective. So how do you see those cultural discrepancies between the IT folks, the developers, the business folks, the sales folks who are on the complete opposite side, who don't have any clue how anything works, and who have issues getting their expense report PDF'd and sent on in time so that they get reimbursed. So you see that. How do you handle those, or have you seen those discrepancies? And how do organizations resolve that?
I've seen them, and I've been guilty of perpetuating it myself, because we failed to communicate what was actually necessary. So I built early on, when I didn't know what I was doing with these things. I had to manage teams without ever having had any kind of training, because, well, it was a startup, and people tend to forget that a lot of the time when people work in startups, they end up becoming de facto managers without any kind of background in it or any training. I very much didn't like talking to people. I'm still very much introverted, and I need lots of time to recharge in my quiet time. But I had to, and I had to learn how to deal with that. And a part of that challenge was to figure out, okay, how are you actually communicating the company vision and what we are going to be doing? And the result of not doing it is that you end up with these dysfunctional tech teams that will talk a lot of shit about sales and marketing and about the C-suite, because they are like, well, they have no idea. They don't understand what they're doing, and they don't understand why they are doing what they are doing, because nobody has told them what the actual company goals are. And I think sort of one of the prominent examples I have of that is that I spent 3 years working at Yahoo. At the time, Yahoo was about 10,000 people, so about 20 years ago. And the engineering team in Yahoo was convinced that Yahoo was a technology company. They were very proud of the technology they were building and stuff like that. But to management, Yahoo was an advertising company. They were selling ad space, and all technology existed solely to serve that. And there's a massive disconnect. And you would have a development teams that would be very focused on what do we do to build the best technology possible, where management is like, well, we need more eyeballs. That's more eyeballs that matters. And we need you to serve up something that will get us more eyeballs. So if you don't communicate those values and the intent and the goals of the company that way, you end up with these massive disconnects where the engineering team will not just not know what they are meant to be doing, but they will be actively hostile to the teams that they perceive as
Yeah.
doing something that's not serving what they think they are doing.
And I think that's something that process architecture kind of necessitates. It's a conversation tool.
Yeah.
So you present, hey, here's what we, for instance, here's our like risk management process. Here is the customer segment we're going after, and here's our scale up plan, and here's the process by which we're going to serve those customers. Here's what they are going to expect. Here's what we're going to deliver. And I always like to say, like, I don't care whether or not you think I'm right or wrong. I care whether or not you tell me, because if I'm wrong and you correct me, that's a win for me as well. I
Yeah.
have this now ongoing dialogue, and you feel like you're bought in. And particularly, I've started companies myself. I've worked in early stage startups. The buy-in really matters. The money's good, but the love is way better.
Mm.
And if you can get people to really love what you do, believe in what you do, then they're going to be more aligned when it comes to development, and they're going to be more passionate when it comes to giving their time and being focused on quality and serving you and the customers that you're working together to serve with everything they have. And I feel like an important sort of perk of using process, is that
Yeah.
it helps to build that trust and that relationship that ultimately turns talented individuals into a team in a company that is able to repeatedly scale and deliver capabilities. Pulling back the curtain on folks, we do have notes that we're working from for all of our episodes, because our guests are kind enough to provide those to us, and we work with them collaboratively. But one of the things I did see on this is something about risk. So tell me a little bit more about risk and how it relates to process, how it relates to AI, how it relates to startups, and how you choose to manage and mitigate risk as you're looking to scale.
So that's another pet peeve of mine. So thanks for asking that part. I think yeah, and this is actually one of the easiest things you can do as a startup to both facilitate a conversation about what you're doing, and also start getting some process in place in a way that is not a burden. Even spending half an hour now and again sitting down and updating a risk log and like doing a SWOT analysis, for example, it achieves so much as long as it involves sort of the full chain of management, as well as the various teams. So because that's going to surface if you are sitting down to somebody and talking through sort of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, the developers are going to be surfacing things like, oh, but I'm not sure if this can scale to the 10 million users we think we need to scale to. And your CEO is going to sit there and go, oh, but our pitch deck says, we are planning on targeting 10,000 large corporations. We're not selling to 10 million. um, you quickly start identifying the discrepancies because they often surface as threats and surface as perceived opportunities that the engineering might not be aware of, that kind of thing. So having that conversation is massively helpful for that purpose, but also obviously when you are surfacing actual real threats, actual real strengths and opportunities, it really helps set priorities and determine future priorities in a way that's extremely helpful.
I actually had a question about that, just before we go off
Yeah.
this, because I'm interested in your philosophy on how to hold meetings in this capacity. So, do you find it more useful to have these as interviews, so one-on-one, asynchronous data like conversations, so like through message boards or through emails, or in a larger group setting or on a forum, so either a digital forum where people can see each other's responses, or a large group like in person or Zoom setting where people can bounce off each other's ideas? What do you find most useful for emerging this kind of thing?
So I think you really should do both. And the reason for that is an experience I had managing a team where I was based in the UK, and the development team was split between Beijing and Palo Alto, California.
Hmm.
And so I was doing a lot of remote management, and then I'd fly out
Sure.
to California like every 6 to 8 weeks. And one of the things that I realized very quickly doing that was that these group meetings, they were great for like surface level stuff, but people would not speak up about things a lot of the time.
Mm.
And if I forced one-on-one calls with them, things would eventually come out. But there was a period at the start when I did not realize this. I hadn't had a team that was that sort of uh, uh, far away from me for so much of the time before. And so the first couple of times I flew out to California, I spent basically the week that I was there firefighting personal issues mostly, but also sometimes technology issues. And it was people who wanted somebody else on the team fired for something, and there were people who hated each other. There was like all this kind of
Ooh,
drama
Mhm.
that surfaced
that's
because
rough.
they would not talk about these things in the meetings.
Yeah.
They would not raise, even if obviously some of these things wouldn't have been appropriate to raise in a group setting. But there's all of these things, even technical decisions that wouldn't come up in a group setting because person A knew that person B would object to their view on a technical decision, and so they just kept their mouth shut because they weren't
Yeah.
personality to do it. And
Yeah.
when I switched to basically forcing the issue by insisting on doing one-on-one calls with everybody every week, whether or not they said they had nothing to talk about, it was in the calendar.
Yeah.
I would make the call. We would sit there and chit chat about the weather if they couldn't come up with something. But what invariably happened was that when they knew that they were going to have that call anyway, all kinds of shit would come out.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
would, it would simplify life massively because we would nip things in the bud, both technical and personal stuff, much, much sooner. And that's easy to sort of ignore when you're in the room with the team because you might think you will spot whether somebody's unhappy, but you won't.
Yeah.
You will miss that a lot of the time.
Yeah, I like to do the same thing, same logic. When with my employees, I always said, yeah, let's have a Drew fix. And if we have nothing to say on this, well, we can cancel it or whatever. But it's in the calendar. I like that very much. But there's another aspect on it, and I'd like to give a shout out. Now back to years ago, we had an episode with James Toomey. I think it was episode
Yeah.
51, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that was early
And
on.
yeah, and I was working at a software vendor at that point in time, relatively small, 100 people ish. Um, and James's specialty, yeah, with his company, Tomorrow Labs, big shout out to them, um, is getting that alignment done. Where does the business go? Where does everybody fit in? And what I noticed is the way how he did that workshop. Was like a 3-day workshop that we did with him. He has a knack of bringing people on the same page, right? And I could see how the mood in the room changed. And I was like, yeah, not the chaka moment, but it's like, yeah, this is where we want to go, right? So I think you need both. You need to have that clarity, and I think it's more than just a task list in Jira or any other wonderful ticketing tool, right? It's a little bit more than the personal interaction that you have. I think you still have to not only develop the vision, you need to communicate it. And I think this is a thing because it's also a process, right? Is a thing that I see a lot of companies don't do, right? And then you suffer through, oh yeah, I'm yeah, put their hands in front of their chest and say, oh yeah, I'm just watching. I'm not involved. I like my paycheck, but yeah, you guys do you, and then I might or might not chime in. Have you seen similar things, and what is your opinion on that?
One of the reasons to keep on communicating the vision, all the way from the interviews, all the way up from the initial hiring process to and through to the day to day, is that you are going to end up with developers who will forget about it because the daily grind is very much tactically focused.
Hmm.
And if you don't keep on reiterating, this is all in service of this vision, this is what you're actually doing and what you're actually building to, people are going to detach from that very, very quickly.
Mhm.
But they also need to see the connections. They need to be able you need to, basically spoon feed every step through that and show them, well, how is that vision, linked to the strategies that you're applying, and how is that linked to the actual tactical stuff that the individual developers are working on.
I want to jump in here a little bit because I know we've been talking a lot. Leave our audience a bit of a break before we get into our final section. But as we take a pause here, I want everyone to reflect on their experiences in organizations, either as a startup or in their larger organizations. How have you found ways to align with the organization or your team's goals what's been effective in bringing you on board and helping to help you understand the processes you're going to be involved in, the vision that those lead to, the customers they're going to serve, and the process and architecture that supports you from other teams, particularly relevant as you scale up your business. We'll leave you for a moment to think about that and come back with our final section and conclusions for the show.
The wind will blow, but it's just changing. It's just changing. The wind will blow, but it's just changing. It's just changing.
And welcome back. Vidar, very, very interesting conversation, because you obviously bring the experience from different startups, from different organizations that you founded or were involved with, and you've seen the patterns that people do in organizations, and it doesn't have to be the big 250,000 person organization, but that obviously happens on the smaller scale as well. But obviously the big question that everyone now has is, well, how can I get in contact with Vidar? And I like to ask the same question. How can people reach you?
Well, it's very easy. I have nowhere to hide. My name is globally unique. So Vidar Hokstad, and you'll find me on LinkedIn, of course. I also have my website on hokstadconsulting.com. So feel free to reach out to talk about AI, DevOps, helping startup scale, anything really.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and I
appreciate
definitely
that.
will bring the links into the show notes. And JM, I think that's a little hint for you to
Oh
start
yeah, we're
your
gonna talk about show
monologue.
notes. Listen, I'll try and keep it short. But listen, folks, you've been really great to stay all the way to the end of the episode. Vidar, thank you. That was a fantastic discussion. I think I've learned a lot. Hopefully, everyone out there has learned a lot. And if you did learn a lot and you like this, give us a like. So follow us on LinkedIn, go on YouTube, subscribe to What's Your Baseline. Like our videos, share them with your friends. We'd love to grow this community, and we really appreciate everything everyone does. If you really love us, go find us on Substack or on Patreon. The links are, of course, below. And remember, we just talked about this last episode, the BPM operating system. You can go to bpm-os.org to find out more about all the apps that Roland has been developing and What's Your Baseline is releasing. So we are really excited to see everyone taking those various apps and using them, the cadence in their life. There's lots of things you can do with all the things we've been building. So check that out, or check out last episode number 114, if you want to find out everything that does. But this has been a ton of fun. And until next time, I've been J.M. Erlandson.
And I've been Vidar Hokstad.
And my name is Roland Volt.
And we will see you in the next one.